I'm going to go through the steps that you need to use if you're trying to solve a right angle triangle problem using trigonometry. Okay, so these are the steps we're going to follow. I'm going to focus on each one in turn and then we'll draw them all together for a couple of examples. Okay, right, so last week you did learn how to label these triangles with opposite, adjacent and hypotenuse sides. So they're all right angles. I'm going to put the right angles on. Okay, now the hypotenuse is the name of the longest side on a right angle triangle, and you always find it opposite the hypotenuse. So it's this one over here. Okay, and if we look at the angle 40 degrees, okay, we can see it's touching the hypotenuse, but it's also touching this side. So we call this the adjacent side. And then directly opposite the angle that's marked is the other side here, which is the opposite side. Okay, let's look at the triangle down here. So the longest side is opposite the right angle, that's called the hypotenuse. The one that's touching the angle at the other side is the adjacent side, and we have the side opposite the marked angle. That's the opposite. On here, the longest side is this side opposite the right angle, and then touching the 40 degrees we've got the hypotenuse and the adjacent, and opposite the 40 degrees is over here. And finally this one, we've got the longest side hypotenuse and we've got 40 degrees marked here, so adjacent is there, and then we have opposite. Okay, right, once we've labelled it, our next step is we need to choose whether we're going to be using the sine, cos or tan ratio, okay, to solve our problem. So it depends on what sides we've got labelled. So we remember so, ca, tua. If O and H are labelled, we're going to use sine. If adjacent and hypotenuse are labelled, we're going to use cos, and so on. Okay. Right, so for this first triangle, numbered 4, we have got a letter on the hypotenuse side and we've got 12 on the opposite side and nothing at all on the adjacent side. So that is so. So we're going to use sine for that one. Just write down. So sine. Alright, now for this one down here, we've got an x labelled on the hypotenuse and we've got a 12 labelled on the adjacent side. Okay, and nothing at all on the opposite side, so A and H is from cos, so we use cos for that one. Okay, for the next one, we have got something on the hypotenuse, the 12, and we've got something on the adjacent side. So again, so if I just jot down so, ca, tua, so we've got something on adjacent and hypotenuse, so that is going to be cos again. Alright, and then the last one, we've got something on the adjacent side, something on the opposite side, and nothing at all on the hypotenuse. So opposite and adjacent, tua. Yeah, so we're going to use tan. Fantastic. So once we've identified which ratio we're going to use, we write down the equation and we put in the information we've got. So in SOHCAHTOA, it's sine or cos or tan of the angle, and then the first letter goes on the numerator and the second letter on the denominator. Okay, so that means for sine, we do sine of the angle is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay, so for our question here, our angle is 40, the opposite side has got a 12 on it, and the hypotenuse has an x. Okay. For this one we've got cos, so we have cos of the angle is adjacent over hypotenuse. For our triangle we've got cos of 40 is the adjacent side has got an x on it and the hypotenuse has a 12 on it. Okay, for tan, now tan of the angle is opposite over adjacent. So we write our information in. We've got tan of 40 is, and the opposite is 12, and the adjacent is x. Okay, I'm going to leave the cos one. It's very similar. I'm going to look at one other one at the bottom here as well. Now on this triangle, I've got to label it, longest side hypotenuse. My angle x is next to this side, the adjacent, and opposite this side. Okay, I've got information on the adjacent side and the opposite side. So that's TOA, so I need to use tan. So I've got tan of the angle is opposite over adjacent. So for the information we've got, tan, and this time the angle is x, and that is equal to, the opposite side is 14, and the adjacent is 12. Okay, right, now, on our steps, we have done label, choose, write the equation. The next step is to solve the equation. Okay. It's getting a bit crowded on here, but we'll try. So here's our equation. All right. I'm going to jot those down separately so that it's easier for you to see. So I'm going to start with this cos one. So we've got cos of 40 is equal to x over 12. Now you know how to solve equations with x over something. You just multiply both sides by the 12. So we've got 12 cos 40 is equal to x. Okay. And that's it. So we've now got x on its own. Right, let's look at the sine one here instead. So we've got sine of 40 is 12 over x. Now this one's less pleasant because we have x as a denominator and we never know what to do with that. So what we do is we multiply both sides by x, and then that cancels the denominator and we don't have it anymore. So we're left with x sine 40 is equal to 12. Now we haven't quite got x on its own yet, so we're going to divide both sides by sine 40, and that will give us x is 12 over sine 40, just to see that. So we're dividing by sine 40 on both sides. Okay? Right. Let's have a little look at, we'll do one very similar to that. So we'll look at the tan one here. So we've got tan of 40 is equal to 12 over x. So just to clarify what we're doing when we have x as the denominator, we don't like it, we multiply both sides by x. So now we don't have a denominator. And then we need to get x on its own, so we've got to kind of get rid of the thing that x is times by. Okay, so we're going to divide both sides by tan 40. So that gives us x is 12 over tan 40. Okay, right, the last one we'll have a look at here is this tan one. So we've got tan of x is 14 over 12. So tan of x is 14 over 12. So now this x is mixed up inside the tan. If you press it on your calculator, you end up with some brackets because it's tan of x, just like you might do the square root of x. Okay, so we have to do the opposite of tan, which is inverse tan. So we're going to inverse tan both sides, and this is what we get. Okay, so just to kind of reiterate what that means. So if you remember function machines, if you start with a number and then you do some function to it, then you end up with like f of x. And if you go backwards, you need to do the inverse. Okay, and if you did that in year 9, then we put a little -1 there to show we were doing the inverse. Okay, so it could be that you're timesing by 2, so the inverse is dividing by 2. Or it could be that you're squaring, so the inverse is square rooting. Or it could be that you're cube rooting, so the inverse is cubing, and so on. So if you're tanning, the inverse is inverse tanning. Okay? Right. We're going to draw all the steps together. So the only step we didn't do was typing on the calculator, which we'll do now with 3 examples, which is proper problem solving. Okay? So proper use of trig rather. Now, in your exam, it won't say use trigonometry. It'll just say, here's a right angle triangle, find the missing side or the missing angle, okay? And you have to know that when you see a right angle triangle with an angle and some sides on it, labelled on it, then you can use trigonometry, okay? So we follow the process. We label the sides. Hypotenuse is the longest side opposite the right angle. Adjacent is next to the marked angle, and opposite is opposite the marked angle. Right, we have got some information on the adjacent side and the hypotenuse, but not on the opposite side. So we're thinking tour. We've got something on the opposite, the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So that's so that's cos. So we write down cos, the angle is adjacent over hypotenuse, first letter over second. Okay, so let's put our information in. The adjacent side has got an x on it and the hypotenuse has got 10. Right, so we've written our equation down. Now we need to solve the equation to get x on its own. So we're going to times both sides by 10. Okay. Right, and now finally we're going to work out what this x is by typing on our calculator. So, right, you can see that just in the middle of the top section we've got sin, cos and tan. So we want to do 10 cos of 30. And that gives us 5 root 3, or as a decimal, 8.66. Okay, so x is 5 root 3, or 8.66 centimetres. All right, let's try another example where we're finding a side. Okay, so we always start the same. We label the sides with hypotenuse on the longer side, adjacent next to the angle on the other side from the hypotenuse, and opposite the marked angle. Okay, here we've got some information on the hypotenuse, we've got some information on the opposite, but there's nothing at all on the adjacent side. So then we're thinking tour. We've got something on the opposite and the hypotenuse, so we're going to use sin. So sine. Sine of the angle is the first letter opposite over hypotenuse. For our triangle, that sine of 30 is equal to, the opposite has 10 and the hypotenuse has x. Right, so we have labelled, chosen, written the equation. Now we solve the equation. We don't like it because x is a denominator. So we're going to multiply both sides by x, okay, to keep it balanced. And then we need to get x on its own, so we divide by sine 30. So we've got x is 10 over sine 30. Okay, so first we multiply both sides by x, so those x's cancelled, alright, and then we divided by sine 30 on both sides. Okay, and then we get the calculator, and we go 10 over sine 30. We get 20. That's a nice answer. Okay, right, last question. So, the last question is got an unknown angle. We start exactly the same. Hypotenuse is the longest side, adjacent is next to the marked angle, opposite is opposite the marked angle. We have information on the adjacent side and the opposite side. Okay, so thinking Sokotoa. O and A, so we're going to use tan. So we've got tan of the angle is the opposite over the adjacent. So tan of the angle is x, the opposite is 8, and the adjacent is 10. Right, now this time, remember, we want to get x on its own, so we need to get rid of tan. We need to inverse tan. Okay, so on your calculator, you can see that just above sin, cos and tan, in little yellow writing, there's inverse sine, inverse cos, inverse tan. So like tan to the minus 1. So we're going to do shift, tan, shift, I've done it again, shift and tan. And then we've got 8 over 10. And that gives us the angle is 38.7 degrees. Okay, I hope that's helped you.